This is the swatch that I've knit out of Sandnes Garn Line for the Thea top. I've used a 4mm needle to start, and then above the purl row I switched to a 3.75mm needle. I haven't washed it yet, but I've put a ruler over it, and I'm from 0 to 4 inches I've counted the stitches, and on the 4mm needle I got 22 stitches, and on the 3.75mm needle I got 23. The pattern actually says 20 stitches. I was hoping, but the smallest size is a 36 inch. And so if my gauge stays smaller, my end result will be 10% smaller. So we'll see how I go after I've blocked it. One other thing that I'm noticing about this swatch, I haven't blocked it yet, but on the 4mm needle it's quite drapey, and on the 3.75mm needle it's a bit stiffer. I think at the moment I like this fabric a little better, but I'll see how I feel after I've blocked it. I've filled a container with some 40-degree water, and I'm just popping my swatch in and just letting that absorb the water. Just give it a little squeeze. And I'm going to just leave it in the sink for about half an hour, and then I'll pull it out and dry it in a towel and leave it out to dry. So I ended up having to go out, and this has been sitting here for about 3 hours, but I really only needed to be in for about half an hour. So I'm just going to squeeze out the excess water, and if it was a large garment I would have it in a towel, but because it's just a swatch, I've got a hand towel, and I'll just roll that up and press on it. I could stand on it if I wanted, but it's just a swatch, so it's not very big. I'll just pop it in another spot. All right, so that's had most of the water squeezed out of it. I might just do one more. Now I've just placed it on my bed, and I'm not going to pin it or anything. I'm just putting it out and uncurling the edges. Because I don't actually want to, I don't want to pull it out or distort the fabric. I just want to sort of have it sitting flat so that I've got an idea of what it would be like. And so this is just sitting on my bed, and I'll put a ceiling fan. It should dry within a couple of hours. So my swatch has dried, and I've been able to measure the gauge. So I put a ruler around the middle of each section, and I just count the V's along for 4 inches. So this was the 3.75mm section, and I got 21.5 stitches over 4 inches. And this was the 4mm section, and when I counted along there I got 20. So the gauge changed a lot after washing the swatch. It stretched out quite a bit. I can also get a bit of an idea of the row gauge, but I haven't done a very large swatch for each section, so I've only really got about 1 inch to work off. So I wouldn't put a lot of store in the row gauge, but that's not as important for me as the stitch gauge. I can work out the row gauge better as I'm knitting the pattern. So this swatch is for the Thea top, and the gauge for the Thea top is 20 stitches over 4 inches. So I get gauge on the 4mm needle, but the pattern doesn't have a size small enough that I feel comfortable knitting, so I'd have to alter the pattern if I use the 4mm needle. I get 21.5 stitches over 4 inches on the 3.75mm needle, which would size down enough, I think, if I knit the smaller size, but I'm just not, I'm just thinking about whether I like that fabric. It has stretched out. It was, on the 3.75, it was 23 stitches over 4 inches, and now it's 21.5. So I think that I might end up going with a 3.75mm needle. In swatching for the Thea top, the smallest pattern size is 34.7 inches. So the finished measurement, if I got gauge, would be 34.7 inches. But I'm getting 21.5, if I use the smaller swatch, I'm getting 21.5 stitches, and the pattern gauge is actually 20 stitches. So I'm going to multiply by 20 on 21.5, and that will tell me what my finished measurement will be if I knit it on the that's with the 3.75mm needle. So 34.7 times by 20 divided by 21.5, because I know I'll get a smaller finished garment because my gauge is tighter, so my fraction should be less than 1, and that gives me 32.25 inches, and my bust circumference is 32 inches. So if I knit it on the 3.75mm needle and my gauge stays true at 21.5 stitches, my finished measurement my finished garment will have 1/4 of an inch of positive ease. And because of the style of it, I feel pretty comfortable with that as a finished garment. And just looking at the fabric, this is a little dense, that's the only thing, but it is, you know, it's a top, so it's not like sort of a flowy cardigan. It is meant to be a top. The other thing that's different about my swatch, I didn't have very deep, like a very deep swatch. So my row gauge, I've got a bit of an idea. I was able to measure 1.5 inches. And so my row gauge looks like I get 32 rows over 4 inches. And the pattern gauge was meant to be 26 rows. So all of my stitches are a little bit shorter. So I'd either have to knit more rows or accept that the armhole depth will be a little bit less. And I actually have found, it looks like on the pattern that the armhole depth is actually very deep, something like 9 inches from here to here. And that seemed quite deep for me. So if I did 9 times 26 on 32, that will tell me, so dividing by my row gauge, because I know that I'll get a slightly shorter armhole, so 9 times 26 divided by 32 will be more like 7.25 to 7.5 inches roughly, and I think that's probably a little bit better for me. There'll be less chance of my bra showing through. So as long as I'm comfortable with the drape of this fabric, then I should be able to just knit the smallest size on a 3.75mm needle. And so that's just going down 1 needle size, and I'll also go down 1 needle size for the ribbing.